Welcome, 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 and thank you for joining us on another episode of today's Electrical Estimating. I'm your co-host, Chris Traumer, and as always, I'm joined by our other co-host, Sal Huerta. So Sal, we're picking up on a conversation topic that we spoke with Matt Firestone about 6 months ago, and that is overhead. And it's something that Matt talked about through a whole episode, I think, because of the fact that so many contractors aren't taking their overhead into account when they're estimating jobs. So they're estimating it. They're saying they win the bid, they do the job, and then at the end, they're like, well, why is my profit not as much as I figured it was going to be from the start? Well, they're forgetting to put their overhead in, the expenses that come along with leasing trucks, your in-house personnel, software, things of that nature. So Derek does a great job of speaking to that point further and in more detail, but also how Vision's EBM software lets you input that information into it so that it can calculate it for you as you're looking at your estimate. Talking with Derek, it sounded like he said some of the customers they speak with, they don't update this for 2, 3, 4 years at a time. And as we and you will hear in this conversation, I mean, it seems like something that needs to be happening on a very regular basis. He's saying once a year, maybe even quarterly, depending on how fast your company's growing or what you're doing. Because if you're leasing new trucks, that needs to come into that number that you have in EBM, or if you're purchasing new equipment or hiring new internal personnel or even getting new software, all those little numbers, they might be small, but they do add up over time and they're going to eat into any of your profit if you're not accounting for those ahead of time. And I guess on the flip side, if you're paying a truck off or somebody is retired or, you're decreasing your costs or your overhead, that's something else you got to put in there, because if you still have that high number, it's going to be accounting for that higher number when you're creating your estimates in EBM. And as we know, the lower number is usually the most attractive. So getting those out of there, lowering your overhead costs in there are going to create more accurate bids, I guess, either way for you.
This is a subject that's, fortunately, I've been around a long time that I've actually seen this change. But to answer your question specifically, absolutely, looking into these numbers are going to help you run a better business. And what I was alluding to earlier about being a part of this for a long time, I've been around this industry for almost 45 years now. And when I first started, there were a lot of, the common practice for like service and repair contractors were to actually charge you an hourly rate and then basically take your invoice of products that you've purchased and then that you used on the job, double the price, and that's what you charge the customer. And when you think about it today, like you're talking about the overhead part of this and markups, the guy didn't get paid until he got to your house. So the things that you just talked about right now, opening his doors, what is the light bill, what's the gas bill, what's the maintenance for the trucks, all these things they didn't take into account. They were just going to come to your house and start charging you an hourly rate from there. The second part to that, when it came to the products that they purchased for the job, basically they would take the invoice, double the price, and then that's what they would charge. But think of it this way, the hard-earned discount that contractor got from his distributor, he basically just passed that discount along to his customer. So when you put those two factors together, these guys weren't making any money at all. And, because they didn't account for all these things. And now one of the biggest things that had to change was the mindset. They had to change from a mentality of being thought of as a handyman into an actual small business owner. And when that mindset changed, that's when all the things you were talking about, the insurances, all the different, the stuff you need for the trucks, the tools, all these things had to be accounted for and put in a price before you even took the phone call to go to do the work. So that's where Derek and mentions that this is the kind of things that their program has the ability of doing now, which is putting in factors that allows them to combine all these things together.
I mean, I couldn't imagine if they haven't updated this number for 3, 4, 5 years. And you just mentioned it there, insurance. I know every year my car insurance, my homeowner's insurance, it's going up little by little, but you add that number up after 5 years and you look at how much insurance they're probably carrying for business insurance. What else do we have? Vehicle insurance, if they have their own space that, they're paying insurance on that, whatever it may be. I mean, there's probably multiple insurance that they're carrying to cover their business. And if each of those are going up small amounts every year, and then you add 4 years of that on top of it, you're not getting a clear picture. And I think as we talk about here, you're starting with inaccurate numbers and you're never going to get an accurate number at the end. If you start with variables that don't make sense, you're never going to get an accurate answer or solution. And all you're doing by not upping that overhead cost in EBM is just eating away at your end profits and getting a little surprised because you're not expecting that when you finish the project and you go back and look at your job costs and you go, why am I, missing a couple $1,000s? Well, you forgot to cover all that overhead. Like you said, even the small things of just turning on the lights. I mean, you have that monthly bill. You need to account for that. Even at big or small that bill is, it needs to be accounted for.
And you mentioned it in the past. We've talked to contractors who have one job, and then we're close to losing money. But
Mhm.
because their numbers are so low, they didn't take in account all of these different variables that you're talking about. That makes the difference of the overhead in the markups that need to be done. And like you said, something that needs to be done and looked at more frequently than every year, 2 years, 3 years, that kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, I think it needs to be, whenever anything changes within your finances, getting a new vehicle or purchasing a large amount of tools or, bringing somebody on or somebody retiring on the opposite side, that needs to be accounted for. That information needs to be passed along to whoever's doing the estimating so they could update EBM and keep your overhead accurate. And that way you just don't have to worry about it as long as you're staying on top of it on, whenever these expenses are occurring, or as Derek goes to mention, at least once a year, the better off you're going to be in the long term.
Absolutely.
So, all right. Well, let's jump into it. Always good talking with you, Sal. We'll catch up with you next week. Take care, everybody.
We talked about the markup. What we didn't talk about was overhead, keeping track of all of your expenses, like what do you call those? Is it indirect, non-productive?
Yeah, I think indirect costs
Indirect.
maybe, or
Yeah, I think. Anyway, that's where my expertise lacks a little bit. I'm
yeah,
forgetting the phrase, but you need to keep track of like what your rent is, what your like I don't know leases on your trucks or whatever
yeah,
it is.
something of that nature.
Yeah, all your employee overhead, all of that, and that needs to be factored into your bids,
Yeah.
and that's a little bit on your side. That's outside the estimating software is not gonna really help you do that too much.
Mhm.
It gives you plenty of options to add in overhead, whether it's a percentage or a lump sum or however you wanna do it. There's all the options are built in one tool. So you just click a button for overhead and boom, you have options for plugging in what you want.
Yeah.
But you have to keep track of that, and it's not too difficult. I'm not an expert at computing that for you, but I know we have a video on overhead and markup on YouTube that does go into more detail.
And I think we'll actually have the link for that one
Okay,
or
yep,
on that talking point in the description and
perfect.
the summary down below. So they want to learn a little bit more about there. I think it was the 8 electrical estimating mistakes that are costing you big time. So they can
Yeah,
jump into that,
big
learn a
time.
little bit more. But it's funny you bring this up because we talked to Matt Firestone, God, what was it, 6 months ago, Sal? He's like an outside consultant. And he said that's one of the biggest things that people were forgetting about were
Mhm.
their overhead. Like they were going through and like, hey, this is great. We won the bid. We came in a little bit lower than everybody else. Look at the money we're making. And then they get to the end of it and they're like, well, you got to pay for your truck lease. You got to pay
Yeah.
for the building expenses. You got to pay for your software fees that you have. You got to pay for this, this, and this. And they didn't think about any of that when they're going in there. So that great profitable job that you just finished, now they're paying all their bills. It doesn't look as good anymore.
Right, and not only do you need to compute the overhead, you need to do that at least once a year or so
Yeah.
because as we've seen over the last I don't know, decade, especially, costs go up, you know?
Yeah.
Benefits costs go up, car expenses go up, everything has gone up, so you
I don't
need.
really seen anything that has
Right.
gone down in the last, half a decade or so. You have to be ready for that cost to go up. If one day they do go down, that would be amazing, but I've
Yeah.
not seen that trend of late, as you mentioned.
So you do need to do it periodically. You might argue that if you use a percentage of, like, I don't know, I'm just throwing this out there, 10%
Yeah.
on your bid is overhead, then
Mhm.
that kinda cover if your expenses go up, that might mean that material prices have gone up too, and anyway, and
But
maybe
it might
labor has gone up because 'cause you've gone into EBM and changed the hourly rate on your employees in EBM so that that gets computed properly against the labor hours, but that's something that we recommend is remember at least once a year, put on your calendar, say,
yeah.
"Take a look at your overhead again," and make sure that what you're putting into your bids is enough.
Should they do, you mentioned it there every year for your overhead, which is
Mhm.
great, but you also mentioned their labor and material pricing and updating your database. Should that be something they put in that same list that once a year, let me sit down with my estimating guys or whoever it may be and just be like, okay, we need to update and go through our overhead, our labor costs that are in there, our product cost, our database, make sure that we're just updating everything on a regular basis. Cause it seems like you were just saying you get the software, you go 2, 3 years, you don't update anything in there. Prices are always going up. And then all of a sudden you're like, well, things have changed, prices have increased. I haven't done anything on a regular basis. It seems like maybe that's your spring cleaning checklist when it
Yeah.
comes to that.
It's a good idea, and we don't promote that, but we should. As part of our software, you get support, tech support,
Yeah.
and our team's been with us for forever. It's great. They're super knowledgeable, so you could always create a case with us and kinda have a checklist of things. "Hey, I wanna go over these things real quick with you, Vision,
Yep.
because I wanna make sure that my software is doing what it should, my price updates are doing what it should. I think I'm good. You don't need us, but yeah, that's actually a really good idea. At least once a year. I mean, there's more. Some companies do it like once a month with their material prices. They'll look over everything and make sure they're on the right page if they have that person that they've sort of tasked with that.
Yeah.
Labor, I'm not 100% sure, but if you shift, I don't know, maybe you do pay raises around a certain time of the year. I don't know. Yeah, that would be the time to also get with your estimator if you're
Yeah.
not the estimator and make sure your bids reflect that you're now paying your people more or yeah.
And with this overhead feature that's in the program that you mentioned, so you can open it up. Do you just put in a number like, hey, this is it? Or is there just different columns that you can sort of assign percentages to or amounts to, and then it'll automatically work that into your bids so you're aware of it?
Yeah, that's pretty much how it works. Yeah, there
So nice and easy, but maybe, so they should be keeping in mind if you go out and buy 2 new work trucks and you're, having them on a
Mhm.
payment, now go in and adjust your overhead there. If you've added new employees, go update your overhead there. Or as we just talked about, insurance every year loves to jump up and double or triple or whatever it may be. It never gets cheaper. Go in
Mhm.
there and update that in there. But even if they do pay off their trucks, go update it in there because this is all going to affect that number that
Yep.
Vision's putting together utilizing the overhead for them, correct?
Yep. Make sure you're competitive and make sure you're profitable. So cover your expenses, so then the rest is gravy, I guess. And that's where the margin or profit comes in. Set a
And
different percentage for that on what you're comfortable with on that job or,
yeah,
your baseline. But so
and I
that's
love what you just said there too, having a customer service team that's always
mhm.
available that people might be listening for the first time and be like, I have no idea what they're talking about. Maybe I should be doing this. Or they could be have done it a year ago and they're like, well, am I missing anything else within here that I should be putting in here or what else? It'd be great, call up your team and be like, hey, um, what should I be doing? Am I missing something? This is what I'm doing already. And then they know, like you were saying, everything across it, not just their overhead is getting updated in case they need that information. If you're
Mhm.
starting with false facts, you're never going to get to a correct answer. So this seems like it's a very important, easy step because you already know what you're paying out, that you can calculate it and put it in there.